My name is Sophia Reynolds. I am 29 years old. And until the summer everything broke apart, I worked as a financial advisor at a bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, where people trusted me with retirement plans, mortgage decisions, and the kind of money choices that shape an entire life. I was good at helping strangers protect what was theirs. I just never imagined I would have to do that with my own family. The call lasted less than 2 minutes before my father said he had to go, and if he had ended it properly, this story would have turned out very differently. But he did not. I was still holding my phone when I heard his voice again, farther away this time, careless and sharp in a way I had never heard so clearly before. Then I heard the sentence that changed everything. He called me a burden, not a daughter, not someone he loved, a burden. I stood in the kitchen of the house my grandmother left me, the same house I had paid to maintain, the same house I had opened to my parents, because I still believed love could be earned through patience, money, and loyalty. While they were in Europe, spending more freely than they ever had in their lives, I was back home handling the bills, the paperwork, and the quiet messes they always seemed to leave for me. And in one careless moment, I found out that the smiles, the guilt, the family obligation, all of it had been part of something much uglier. I did not scream. I did not call back. I did not warn them. I stayed very quiet. And by the time they came home from Europe smiling and dragging their suitcases to the front door, the key no longer fit. The house was empty, and all I left behind was one note. Before I tell you exactly what they heard when they realized I was gone, tell me where you are watching from right now and what time it is where you are, because I really want to see how far this story reaches tonight. After I heard my father say that word, I did not hang up right away. I wish I could tell you I ended the call with dignity, but I did not. I stayed there in my grandmother's kitchen with one hand gripping the counter so hard my fingers hurt, listening to my parents talk like I was not their daughter at all, like I was some investment that had not paid out fast enough. My mother laughed first. It was soft, almost bored. And then my father said the house should have gone to them in the first place, because parents were supposed to come before children. He said I had been handed everything, which would have been funny if it had not been so cruel, because the truth was I had worked since I was 16, earned scholarships, built my own career, and paid every bill connected to that house after my grandmother died. They talked about me the way people talk about a weak point in a contract. My mother said I still wanted their approval, which meant I would be easy to pressure when they got back. My father said he had already made decisions based on that house becoming theirs eventually. Then he said something that made the room go cold around me. He said he had taken on debt early because once I added their names to the property, they would be secure for the rest of their lives. He said it with total confidence, like it was not a fantasy, like my future had already been reassigned to them. That was when I understood this was not just about entitlement. This was a plan. This had been a plan for a long time. I ended the call, replayed every second in my head, and then sat in complete silence. I looked around the kitchen and suddenly saw things I had ignored for 2 years. My mother's framed prints had replaced the artwork I loved. My father's leather chair had somehow become the center of the living room. Their habits, their voices, their opinions had pushed me to the edges of my own home so gradually I barely noticed until that moment. When my grandmother Rose left me that house in Charlotte, she had left it to me because she knew what it would mean for me to have one thing in life that no one could take away. I still remember the way her attorney read the will and how my parents smiled too quickly, acting supportive before the disappointment hit their eyes. Back then, they said all the right things. They said I deserved it. They said Grandma knew I would take care of it. Then, a few months later, they said it made sense for them to move in temporarily to save money and be together as a family. Temporary became permanent without ever being discussed honestly. I paid the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, and most of the groceries. They offered opinions instead of help. They called it family. I called it love because I wanted to believe that was what it was. Now I finally knew better. That night I did not cry the way I thought I would. I felt hurt, yes, but underneath the hurt was something colder and steadier. It was clarity. I opened my laptop at the kitchen island and started making a list. Legal, financial, personal, exit plan. If my father thought my silence made me weak, he was about to learn what silence sounded like when it stopped asking for permission. The first person I called the next morning was an attorney named Andrea Cole, an estate and property lawyer my bank had worked with before. I did not tell her the dramatic version. I gave her facts because facts hold up better than pain. The house was in my name only. The deed was clean. My grandmother's will was explicit. My parents had lived there with my permission, paid no rent, and had no ownership interest. Andrea told me exactly what I needed to hear. Legally, the house was mine to sell. They had no right to stop me, and no right to demand proceeds from the sale. She advised me to document everything and handle their belongings carefully, but the bottom line never changed. It was my property. Hearing that from someone with no emotional stake in my life did something important for me. It cut through the guilt. After that, I contacted Ethan Brooks, a real estate agent I trusted because he specialized in private sales for clients who needed discretion. I told him I wanted the house sold fast, quiet, and clean. No yard sign, no open house, no gossip. He warned me I might need to take a little less than the full market peak if I wanted speed, but Charlotte was still hot, and the house was beautiful. The latest estimates put it around $980,000, maybe a little more to the right buyer. I told him speed mattered more than ego. He started calling pre-qualified buyers that day. Then I turned to the part I understood better than anyone else: money. I opened new accounts at a different bank in Raleigh, transferred my liquid funds, changed every password I had, froze my credit, secured my documents, and rerouted my mail. I was not being paranoid. I was being smart. My father had spent years treating access like ownership. I was done leaving doors unlocked. I found a furnished short-term apartment in Raleigh, close enough to build a new life, but far enough to breathe. I bought a new phone, set up a private email, and started quietly moving the pieces of my life out of that house before anyone noticed. During the day, I worked as normally as possible. At night, I packed. Every drawer I opened felt like an excavation site. There were pieces of my grandmother everywhere, tucked between the damage my parents had done and the compromises I had made to keep the peace. Her handwritten recipes, a gardening glove with dirt still trapped in the seam, an old envelope where she had once written a reminder to herself to call me after one of my college exams. I found a card she gave me on my 26th birthday, the last one before she died. Inside she had written, "Never confuse being needed with being loved." At the time, I thought it was one of those wise little grandmother sayings people save on greeting cards and remember later. Standing in that house with packing tape wrapped around my wrist, I finally understood she had been trying to warn me. Ethan called 5 days later and said he had serious interest from a young couple relocating from Atlanta and from a physician moving with her family from Nashville. Both wanted quiet deals and both could move fast. I let him do the showings while my parents were still posting polished photos from Rome and Florence, smiling in front of fountains and cathedrals I had helped pay for. Every time my mother uploaded a picture with a caption about blessings and family, I felt my stomach turn. They were enjoying the dream while actively plotting to strip me of the one thing my grandmother had protected for me. Ethan got the offers within the week. One was strong, the other was stronger and cleaner. I accepted the cleaner one without hesitation. We scheduled the closing for a few days before my parents returned from Europe. Timing mattered. I did not want a confrontation in the driveway, or a screaming match in front of buyers, or one more chance for them to manipulate me face to face. I wanted their confidence to survive right up until the second it collapsed. While the sale moved through the final steps, I handled the part that felt cruel until I remembered what they had planned for me. I hired movers. I inventoried everything in the house. I separated my belongings, my grandmother's belongings, and my parents' belongings with obsessive care. I rented a storage unit in their names and prepaid 6 months. I was not trying to steal from them. I was trying to leave no opening for them to paint me as unstable or unfair. The more organized I became, the calmer I felt. Not because I was heartless, because I had spent my whole life preparing for other people's reactions. For the first time, I was preparing for my own freedom. The closing happened on a bright Thursday morning that should have felt bigger than it did. I wore a navy blazer, signed every page I was handed, answered the title officer's questions, and kept my voice steady even when the address was read aloud. I had lived in that house with my grandmother, then without her, then with two people who slowly taught me what love looked like when it came with calculations hidden underneath it. By the time the final document was signed, the money was already in motion and the property was no longer mine. I expected to feel grief first. What I felt was relief. Relief so deep it almost embarrassed me. Ethan hugged me in the parking lot and asked if I was okay, and I told him the truth. I said I would be. Then I drove straight back to the house to meet the movers. That part was harder. Not because I doubted my decision, but because every room held a version of me that had tried too hard. The dining room where I hosted holiday dinners and did all the shopping while my parents criticized the food. The front hall, where my mother once told a neighbor she was so proud of the family home without ever acknowledging it was mine. The upstairs bedroom where I had sat awake more nights than I could count, wondering why being a good daughter never seemed to be enough. I supervised the movers for hours. My furniture, clothes, work files, personal keepsakes, and everything from my grandmother that had been left specifically to me went onto one truck headed for Raleigh. My parents' clothes, documents, photo boxes, and bedroom furniture went into the other truck headed to storage. I left nothing damaged and nothing behind by accident. I even had the movers label the bins clearly so my parents would have no excuse to claim confusion later. Once both trucks pulled out, the house became strangely quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I walked from room to room one last time. The place looked bigger empty. Cleaner, too. In the kitchen, I stood at the island where I had first heard my father call me a burden, and I let myself feel everything I had pushed aside while planning. I felt the humiliation. I felt the anger. I felt the heartbreak of realizing that some people only love what they can control. Then I took a long breath, reached into my bag, and pulled out the note I had written the night before. I had gone through several versions. None of them felt right until I stopped trying to sound clever. In the end, I wrote 2 words in plain black ink: bye. I placed it in the center of the kitchen counter where no one could miss it. I locked the front door, dropped the keys through the mail slot, and got in my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked at the house in the rearview mirror exactly once. My grandmother had given me more than property. She had given me a chance to choose myself when the time came. I did not fully understand that until I turned onto the highway and kept driving toward Raleigh with no intention of coming back. The first night in my temporary apartment felt surreal. It was small, quiet, and completely unfamiliar, but every inch of it belonged to peace. No one commented on what I ordered for dinner. No one asked invasive questions about my savings. No one reminded me how much had supposedly been sacrificed for me. I put my suitcase in the corner, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited for the guilt to hit. It did not. What came instead was exhaustion, the kind that only shows up after survival mode finally loosens its grip. I slept longer that night than I had in months. Over the next 2 days, I ignored every urge to check flight arrival times and track exactly when my parents would land. I knew when the moment came, I would hear it. People like my parents do not absorb consequences quietly, and sure enough, late on Sunday afternoon, my old phone lit up with the first missed call from my father. Then another. Then my mother. Then both of them again. I stared at the screen and pictured them in the driveway with their expensive luggage and their shocked expressions, still expecting the world to bend around them. I did not answer. An hour later, the voicemails started. At first, my father sounded irritated, like he thought I was being dramatic, then angry, then genuinely panicked. My mother went from pretending concern to accusing me of cruelty in less than 10 minutes. By nightfall, I had 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and more texts than I bothered to open. I only listened to one message all the way through. It was my father shouting that I had no right to do this to them. That line almost made me laugh. No right. As if he had not just spent weeks assuming the right to my home, my money, and my future. I turned the phone face down on the table and made myself tea. For the first time in my life, their chaos was happening somewhere I did not have to stand inside it. The next morning, the messages got uglier. My father demanded my address. My mother said they were humiliated and stranded, and that decent daughters did not abandon family. Then came the threats. Lawyers, police, court, public embarrassment. Every message proved the same thing. They still believed fear would pull me back into line. I responded to none of them. Around 10 that morning, my branch manager called and asked in a careful voice if there was something she needed to know. My parents had shown up at the bank demanding to see me. My father claimed I had illegally sold the family home and stolen his retirement. He had raised his voice in the lobby. My mother had cried loudly enough for customers to stare. Security removed them before things got worse. I apologized to my manager for the disruption, then calmly told her the house had been mine, the sale was legal, and I had documentation if the bank ever needed it. She told me to take the time I needed and not worry about my job. After the call ended, I sat still for a minute and let that sink in. My parents had tried to drag me back into their performance by threatening my work, and instead all they had done was show another group of people exactly who they were. By day 3, relatives started reaching out. Some were genuinely concerned. Others were fishing for gossip. I said very little. I told the people I trusted that the situation was legal, private, and no longer open for discussion. I kept screenshots, saved voicemails, and forwarded the most aggressive threats to Andrea. She told me I was doing everything right. Then, on the 4th day, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "We need to meet face to face like adults." That told me the number was my father's long before he confirmed it in the next line. He wanted to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Charlotte. He said if I refused, they would keep showing up at my job until I stopped hiding. I read it 3 times and realized something important. He still thought this was about forcing me back into old behavior. He still thought if he pushed hard enough, I would fold. So I agreed to meet, but on my terms. I chose a busy place in the middle of the day and arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. When I walked in, I saw them immediately. My father, David Reynolds, looked older than he had a month earlier. Not frail, just reduced. Like someone had taken his certainty away and left only anger behind. My mother, Laura Reynolds, had the same polished posture she always used in public, but her face was tight and tired. They had never looked more like strangers to me. I stayed standing for a second after I reached the table. My father told me to sit down as if he were still in charge of my life. I sat because I wanted to, not because he said it. He started before I could even take my coat off. He asked where I was living, where their things were, what I thought I was doing, and whether I had any idea how humiliating the last few days had been for them. I let him speak until he ran out of steam. Then I asked one question. Did you really think I never heard what you said? The table went quiet. My mother looked at him first, not at me, and that told me everything. He tried to pivot fast. He said whatever I thought I heard was taken out of context. He said they had been stressed, tired, jet-lagged before the flight home even happened, apparently. My mother added that families say things they do not mean all the time. I listened without blinking. Then I put my phone on the table and pressed play. I had not needed the full conversation. I only played the part that mattered. My father's voice saying I was a burden. My mother saying I could be manipulated because I still wanted their approval. My father saying the house would be theirs in time. The sound was low, but in the silence between us, it might as well have been thunder. My mother went pale. My father's face flushed so dark red I thought for a second he might actually walk out. Instead, he said, recording them was a disgusting betrayal. That was when I knew there was nothing left to save. People who are sorry sound sorry. People who are caught sound offended. He leaned forward and said parents were owed support after everything they poured into raising a child. There it was. The truth again, right in public where he could not take it back. I told him raising a child did not create a lifetime debt. I told both of them that I would never again fund their lifestyle, house them, or discuss my finances with them. I told them their belongings were in storage, prepaid for 6 months, and that was the last logistical kindness they would receive from me. My mother started crying then, but it did not land the way it used to. I had spent too many years confusing tears with innocence. My father said they had nowhere suitable to go because he had made plans based on the expectation that the house would eventually be theirs. He said it like that helped his case. It only confirmed what I already knew. He had gambled with a future that was never his. I stood up to leave, and that was when the mask slipped all the way. He called me selfish, cold, ungrateful, and finally, with a bitterness so naked it almost shocked me, he said I had ruined his life. I looked at him and said no, you built a life around something that never belonged to you. Then I walked out. I thought that meeting would be the end of it. I was wrong. Consequences rarely arrive all at once. They come in waves, and for my father, each one hit harder than the last. Andrea sent a formal warning after he left 2 more voicemails threatening to challenge the sale. It did not stop him from trying, but it did stop him from pretending he had any legal footing. 2 attorneys turned him away once they saw the deed history and the will. The house had been mine. The sale was valid. The proceeds were mine. End of story. But while the legal fantasy collapsed, his financial reality started coming due. My father had not just dreamed out loud in Europe, he had actually acted on those dreams. I learned through one of my cousins that he had borrowed against everything he could reach in the months before the trip. He took a personal loan, he ran up credit cards. He even refinanced his car because he believed he was only months away from controlling a nearly $1 million property. He had spent like a man waiting for a payout. When the payout vanished, the debt stayed behind. My mother blamed him first in private, then more openly. The version I heard from relatives was that she had not realized how much he had borrowed, though I suspect she knew enough. Either way, their marriage shifted fast from smug teamwork to mutual resentment. And then came the public fallout. It turned out my father had not only caused a scene at my bank. A week after the coffee shop meeting, he showed up at the storage facility furious over the fact that the unit was smaller than he thought it should be and screamed at the manager in front of several people. One of them recognized him from the local dealership where he still worked part-time. Another happened to be the aunt of a woman from his sales office. Small communities have a way of connecting the dots faster than anyone expects. Stories spread. Not always accurately, but in this case, accuracy was not the problem. his behavior was. By the time he returned to work, people already knew enough to whisper. A month later, he lost that job too. Officially, it was framed as a staffing decision and professionalism concerns. Unofficially, everyone understood that an older salesman having repeated public meltdowns tied to his daughter, money, and a house that was never his was not exactly the image they wanted on the floor. Losing the job was brutal, but losing the image he had of himself was worse. My father could tolerate stress if he still felt superior. What he could not tolerate was being exposed as weak, reckless, and dependent on the very daughter he had called a burden. Once the paychecks stopped, the car became impossible to justify. He sold it. Then they moved out of the temporary extended stay hotel they had been using since they got back from Europe and into a cramped apartment on the edge of town. The kind of place he used to make jokes about. My mother, who had once floated through other people's houses making comments about decor and standards, now had neighbors who fought loudly enough for everyone to hear. I know this because one of the women in my grandmother's old church, a woman I had not spoken to in over a year, called me one Sunday and said with obvious satisfaction that my parents had been seen carrying discount furniture up a narrow stairwell. I did not ask for details. I did not need them. My father's punishment was not just losing the house he thought he could take. It was being forced to live inside the truth of who he was, without a better story to hide behind. He had called me weak because I still wanted approval. But in the end, I was not the one who built a whole future out of manipulation and borrowed money. I was not the one begging reality to bend after it refused. The strangest part was how little triumph I felt once it all unfolded. There was satisfaction, yes, especially on the days when a fresh voicemail would come in accusing me of heartlessness, as if the accusation itself was not proof that he still understood nothing. But the bigger feeling was distance, emotional distance. Every time he raged, every time my mother tried a softer angle and asked whether this really had to go so far, I heard the same thing underneath it. They still believed my job was to make their lives easier. I never answered. Silence had done more in a month than years of explaining ever had. I poured my energy into my work in Raleigh, into therapy, into rebuilding routines that belonged only to me. I bought groceries without guilt. I slept through the night. I learned what it felt like to make decisions that did not begin with fear of someone else's reaction. Around Thanksgiving, my mother sent a message that almost got through to me. Not because it was sincere, but because it was written well. She said families break and heal all the time and that pride had destroyed enough already. She said my father was depressed, that the apartment was small, that they had made mistakes. But I was still their daughter. Then, in the final paragraph, she asked if I would consider helping with the security deposit on a better place since I had more than enough after the house sale. That was the moment any remaining softness went cold. Even at the edge of their collapse, they were still trying to build a bridge back to my wallet. I deleted the message and went for a walk. The air was cold, the sky was gray, and for the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. My father had once believed my silence would protect him because it meant I would keep absorbing everything quietly. Instead, my silence became the thing that cost him every illusion he had built his future on. A year later, I was living in a townhouse in Raleigh with white kitchen cabinets, too many plants, and a piece I still sometimes stopped to notice on purpose. I had been promoted at the bank, not because my personal life made me stronger in some dramatic movie way, but because I was finally thinking clearly all the time. I was no longer splitting my energy between my work and the constant emotional management that came with having manipulative parents in my home. Clarity is good for a career. So is sleep. So is not being drained by people who confuse access with love. Somewhere along the way, my story started shaping my work in a different direction. I began noticing how many young clients, especially women, came into financial decisions carrying family pressure they could not quite name. Parents who wanted to be added to accounts. Partners who pushed them to co-sign things they did not understand. Relatives who framed control as closeness. I recognized the look in their eyes because I had worn it for years. So I pitched an idea to my branch manager and started hosting free evening seminars called Money Boundaries and Family Pressure. I kept the language practical, not dramatic. We talked about property rights, debt, emergency funds, co-signing, digital security, and the difference between helping someone once and becoming their long-term plan. But the deeper lesson underneath all of it was simpler. Love that depends on access to your money, your home, or your fear is not healthy love. One Thursday night after a seminar, a young woman stayed behind while everyone else left. She was probably 23, maybe 24, and she stood near the refreshment table twisting the sleeve of her sweater until I asked if she was okay. She started crying almost immediately. Not loudly, just the kind of crying that happens when someone has been holding a truth in for too long. She told me her parents wanted her to take out a loan in her name to save their business and had been calling her selfish for hesitating. She said she loved them and did not know how to say no without feeling like a bad daughter. I listened, then told her something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Protecting yourself does not make you cruel. Boundaries are not punishment, they are information. They teach people where you end and where their entitlement has to stop. She hugged me before she left, and after the door closed behind her, I stood there for a minute thinking about my grandmother, about how she had seen the pattern before I did, about how one house, one sentence overheard on a phone call, and one decision to stop explaining had changed the entire direction of my life. I do not hate my parents. That surprises people when I say it, but it is true. Hate keeps a person tied to the thing that hurt them. What I feel now is acceptance. David Reynolds is the kind of man who mistakes control for respect. Laura Reynolds is the kind of woman who calls manipulation peacekeeping if it keeps the family image intact. They are who they are. My job is not to fix them. My job is to make sure their broken ideas do not get to shape me anymore. That, more than anything, is the lesson I carry now. Sometimes the most educational part of pain is what it teaches you to name. Financial abuse, conditional love, emotional blackmail. Once you can name a pattern, you can stop living inside it blindly. And sometimes the most valuable knowledge you can pass on to someone else is that family should never require you to surrender your dignity in order to belong. I used to think being a good daughter meant enduring more, giving more, forgiving faster, and staying quiet no matter what it cost me. Now I think being a healthy adult means telling the truth to yourself first, even when it ruins someone else's version of you. If there is any good that came from what happened, it is this. I no longer confuse guilt with responsibility. I no longer confuse pressure with love. And I no longer believe that saving yourself is something you need permission to do. My father was wrong about one thing that day on the phone. I was never the burden. I was the one carrying everyone else. The day I finally put that weight down was the day my real life began.